Hey guys, welcome back to another workshop where I'm going to show you how to use atmosphere in your exterior renders and create a nice mood and setting for your exterior renders. So you're going to start off by using a 3D Warehouse model, set up the lights, set up the materials, set up the camera view of course, and then we'll learn some cool Vray settings to create this fog effect in Vray for Sketchup. So this is a quick tutorial to help you get better in Vray for Sketchup, and with each new model that you render, the better renders you get to create as well. So we'll create a night render, a day render, and also we'll try experimenting with some materials, example these glass blocks on this facade. Alright, so I'll see you guys in the next video. Cheers. Alright, so to start off, you can open SketchUp. You can use any units which works for you. I'm going to start off by bringing in my 3D Warehouse model. So let's go to Windows and click on 3D Warehouse. Now, there are some featured community models that you can use. I would recommend that you use the same model that I'm using for this workshop. And then for practice, you can select any model and create your own exterior render as well. So I'm going to use a model created by John Luttrop, who has a lot of cool looking models that he's created. And you guys can use any of these models as well. I'm going to use this house 16 by 16 by 6. So let's click on download, click on yes. Give it a bit. And then place it at the origin. Alright, so now we need to clean up this model because there's a lot of extra stuff. So the first thing what I'm going to do, since it's an entire group, I'm going to right click and click on explode. So now we sort of separated it into like different entities. So now I can select all of these 2D figures and the trees and delete them because we're going to be using proper 3D trees and 3D figures, which look much better in renders as well. And we can use a puppy as well, in case since he's added a puppy in the scene. Alright, so we sort of clean that up. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a plugin called Cleanup. You can install it from the extension Warehouse. So just go to extension Warehouse, search for Cleanup. And you can go ahead and download this Cleanup 3 plugin. So once you've installed this plugin, just go to Extensions, Cleanup, and click on Clean. You can use the scope as the model. Click on Purge Unused, so it deletes all unused materials. And you can leave the rest of the settings as is and click on Cleanup. So this would essentially bring down the size of your SketchUp model as well and make it faster for you to model and render in SketchUp. Alright, so the cleaning process is done. And now we can save this model. And also I'm going to delete this Jeep because I can use the Vray Cosmos models for a Jeep as well. So I deleted that. So I'll have to clean up again because I want to clean up the Jeep materials. So I'm going to go to Extensions, Cleanup, clean with last settings. So that's a quick way to clean. And it's done. And now I can save this model out. So go to File, Save, and click on Save. Right, so that's about it. In the next video, we'll set up the camera and we'll further proceed with the render of this model. So I'll see you guys next video. Cheers. Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, we'll set up the camera and also set up the camera output for this scene. Alright, to start off, I'm going to place a camera right in the center of this space. So I'm going to draw a reference line, which is going to be from this edge. Let's snap it to the green axis by pressing the left arrow key and then click on this edge. So now we have a line. Let's move it out. You can see where the line is. Also, while moving out, not blindly move it out. Make sure to snap it by pressing the right arrow key to the red axis, that is. And now what I'll do is I'll draw a line from the center. I'll actually draw a line from this edge to this edge, because the center of this space would be more compositionally looking better. So I'm going to draw a line from this edge to this edge and then I'll move the line out. So don't draw it all the way, just draw it to the center there, then move it out and also draw a midpoint this way. Okay, and now let's place our camera. So go to Camera, Position Camera, and then place our point here. Alright, so now it's nicely bang in the center of the scene. Now what I need to do is I'll quickly create a scene first and then update the settings. So let's go to our Scenes tab here and click on the plus button to add a scene. Okay, great. So now what I can do is change the render output because I can only see half of the building. So let's go to our asset editor here. Go to Settings. Let's go to Render Output and switch on Save Frame. And let's change the aspect ratio from 16:9 to 4:5 portrait. So now you can sort of see the entire building, but the problem is we sort of zoomed out a little too much. So I'm going to press Z on my keyboard to activate the zoom tool. Now you can see that the field of view is 57. I'm going to change this to around 35. And once I've changed it to 35, I'll then use the scroll button on my mouse to zoom out. You can also pan and sort of scroll. Make sure your eye height is set at this level, so you're looking from a lower point and doesn't look like you're looking from a higher point into your building. So it's better to like sort of have a lower angle. And finally, the last step is to go to camera and click on 2-point perspective. So now your lines are perfectly vertical as well. I always make it a point to give equal spacing on the top and the bottom as well. Alright, this looks good. Let's use the zoom tool and zoom out a bit more. Let's try even 30 should work fine here. So once you change the angle, it goes back to perspective. So go to camera and click on 2-point perspective. Yeah, 30 works well. With these settings, I'm going to update the scene. So right click on scene and click on update. Alright, so we've set the camera. You can set multiple views as well in case you want to show more views of the building. But in this workshop, we're going to just be working with one scene, which is the front scene of the building. Alright, so I'll see you guys in the next video where we'll set up the lighting for this model. See you guys in the next video. Cheers. Alright, hey guys, welcome back. In this video, we're going to set up the lighting for our model. Alright, so to start off, I'm going to go to my asset editor. Going to go to settings, switch on RTX, interactive on. Interactive is what helps you render in real time and make changes in real time as well. And I'm going to switch the denoiser on and set this to NVIDIA AI. And I'll also update the effects to rapid so that I see the denoiser happen as the render progresses as well. Now, if you get a black screen with these settings, then I would recommend that you switch to CPU and switch to Vray. So with these settings, you can continue the workshop. In my case, I have an RTX graphic card, so I'm going to switch to RTX and I'm going to switch to NVIDIA AI. Now with these settings, I'm going to run an interactive render. Alright, so this is our plain render which we got and we need to improve this render. So the first thing what I'm going to do is set up some layers here. I'm going to click on the plus button and add an exposure layer. And then sort of increase the exposure, decrease the highlight burns, add a curves layer and then make an S-curve. So click on the bottom left, drag this to boost the shadows and click on the top right and create sort of an S-curve which will sort of boost the image. You'll see more difference once we set up the materials, better lighting and more. And then you can go ahead and add some additional layers as well. Let's add a filmic tone map which gives it that extra oomph. If you don't see the dial, just drag this to the left and reduce the effect by reducing the amount here. And we can also add a white balance to adjust the temperature. Alright, so I'm going to add this to the history VFP. Now, if you don't see your history VFP here, just go to options, VFP settings, click on history and make sure this is enabled and set a history folder as well. Make sure only auto load layers is switched on and you switch off auto save because you don't need to keep saving each and every render. Alright, so I'm going to add this to the history VFP to do a before and after as we progress through the render. Alright, so now I'm going to set up the natural lighting in the scene and then if we have time, we will set up the artificial lighting or we'll set it up in the next video. So to set up the natural lighting, I'm going to be using the dome light. So I'm going to go to asset editor, go to sunlight and switch off the sunlight. And then I'm going to go to settings, environment and switch off the environment light. So now if I render, we'll get a black screen because there's no light in the render. It's coming from the self illumination here. So we'll need to add some dome lights into the scene. So let's go to Chaos Cosmos. Or we need to add HDRIs into our scene. That is, click on HDRIs. So now I'm going to add some evening HDRIs. So we'll start with creating the night render and then we'll create the day render. So you can go ahead and download any of these HDRIs and I'll show you how to mix and match these HDRIs as well. So I'm going to add sunset 28, sunset 30 and maybe sunset 5 as well. So I'm going to download sunset 5 and add it in. So just click on download and then click on import. You can see that asset import is in progress. It's already added to this Vray asset editor. So if I go to my textures here, you can see that we have all these HDRIs added to our asset editor. So now what I'll do is I'll add a dome light. So I'm going to click on the dome light option here from our Vray lights. So click on dome light, place that in. So that's one. I'm going to place another one. That's 2 and that's 3. So we have 3 dome lights. Now we need to go to Asset Editor, go to Textures and copy each of these to the corresponding dome light. So I'm going to right click on Texture Sunset 5, copy, go to Dome Light and then paste it here. Paste as copy or paste as instance as well. In case if you make changes here, it would reflect here as well. And change the shape to sphere. Let's do the same for the other two. So copy this, paste it here, copy this and paste it here. So we've added 3 dome lights. Now let's go to scene 1. And now we're going to use a cool new feature called Light Gen to generate the lighting in our scene. So you can click on Light Gen from the Vray Lights toolbar. Make sure you click on Exterior, click on HDR. You can also use custom HDR set in case you have HDRI files in your folder. But we're going to use the dome light HDRIs in our scene. So you can see that we are going to generate around 105 variants, which is all right. In case you have a good system, you can go ahead and generate these 105 variants. But I'm going to reduce this unique styles to say about 20 and generate about 60 variants. So I'm going to click on generate and let's see what kind of an output we get from the Light Gen tool. So I'm going to come back once the Light Gen has been generated for all the HDRIs. Right guys, so we've generated our lighting and you can see that it's generated various lighting scenarios for our scene. Now you can go ahead and select multiple lighting scenarios or you can select 2 or 3 and mix and match them using Vray Light Mix. So I'm going to go ahead and select a couple of them. We're going to start with the night render. So I'm going to go for a darker background. So I'm going to select this. I'm also going to select one with some clouds. Now each time you click, what happens is it creates a Light Gen dome light. So if you want to add multiple, you'll have to rename this light. So I'm going to rename this, call this _1. And now when I click on another light dome, for example, if I click on this, you can see that a new one is generated. So let's rename this to _2. So I guess I've added the same one twice. So let me just add this. So select them and then rename them. Okay, I'll add one more. So let's go for this with the orange color and we'll try to mix and match this in the Vray Light Mix. Okay, so I'll rename this, call this 3. So we have 3 lights. Now we can delete these lights because this is an output from these 3 dome lights. So now what I'll do is switch on all 3 of these dome lights. So now we have 3 dome lights that are active. And now what I'll do is I'll add the light mix render element. So I can go to render elements and click on light mix. We can leave group by individual lights on for the natural lighting setup. And then go to settings, make sure your interactive setting is right. Click on scene 1 and render with Vray Interactive. Alright, so now it's kind of overexposed. So let's go to our source light mix here on the right. And then we can switch them off by clicking on all. So switch off all the lights and then switch on each of them one by one. So you can see that this light is a little too bright for the scene. So I'm going to reduce this. Then I'll switch this off and then I'll switch on the next one and see how it matches with the first light. So I'm going to switch on the first light as well. I'm going to reduce this as well. Switch on the third light. So this is how it looks with the third light alone. Let's reduce the third light as well. Now I'll switch on the first light and what I'll do is I'll change the color. So let's go to color here and then I'll make it sort of dark. I'll do the same for these lights as well. Alright, great. So now we have a good background, a cool looking background, and we can set up our night render. So I'm going to add this to the H3 VFE. Let's do a before and after by clicking on A and B. So A, set this as A and set this as B, the previous image that is, and then you can do a before and after. So the background looks good. It gives a dark sort of a mood to the scene. And now we can set up the artificial lights, which I will do in the next video. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Cheers. Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, we're going to set up the artificial lights in the model. Right, so John has created this model with a lot of tags. So it makes it easy to add lights inside the model. So let me just open tags here on the right in our default tray. You can see that he's categorized each of these elements into different tags, which is awesome. So if I switch off wall exterior, you can see the interiors. You can switch off, keep the wall interiors on, switch off the staircase, switch off the windows, and now we can place our artificial lights. Now the best way to illuminate the interiors in your scene is by using the mesh light or the sphere lights. So you're going to place some sphere lights inside this space. So you can go to your Vray lights toolbar and click on sphere light. And then click once and click the second time. Create your sphere light. Now it's very important that you're not intersecting the sphere light with any elements. So always make sure it is floating in space and not intersecting with any objects. And now if you notice, if I right click on this component, light component, you can see that it's a component. So if I make a change to one component, it will reflect in the others as well. Alright, so now since John has created tags for each of the elements, I'm going to follow his philosophy and also create some tags for my Vray elements. So I'm going to click on add tag, call this lights. And then you can either change the tag by going to entity info and changing it here. Or you can use the new feature called tag tool under tag. So you can click on tag tool and then simply apply the tag on the Vray sphere light. So now if I select this light and go to entity info, you can see that the tag has been applied. Alright, so now I'll copy this to the bottom. So let's use this reference point, copy it here. Also move it to the side a bit so it's not intersecting with any objects. That's great. Select this, move it to the top. Alright. And let's move another sphere light on top as well. So I'm using snapping it to the top arrow key to move it in one line. Alright, so I'll place 4 sphere lights. So here there's no space to place a sphere light, so I will place a mesh light or a omni light. So you can click on omni light here and then simply click once to apply your omni light. So basically the difference between the sphere light and omni light is that omni light illuminates from a single point, whereas a sphere light illuminates from the entire sphere. So you can see that the point from where it will illuminate is this point. Alright, now I need to change this as well. So I'm going to use the tag tool and apply the light tag for our omni light. So now if I switch off the lights, you can see that all the lights get off. Alright, so let's place this on each and every level. So I'm going to copy this down and then copy it above as well. Alright, great. So now let's switch on the windows and the walls. So we placed our light in almost all areas of the building. If there are any lacking areas, you can always place more lights. Alright, and I'll sort of move this in a bit. And then I'll go back to scene 1. Now before running the render, I'll just change some of the settings. So let's go to our asset editor and select a sphere light here. Go to options and make this invisible, so I don't have to see the source inside the building. Same goes for omni light, but an omni light generally is a single point, so it doesn't really show in the render, so there's no invisible option. So make sure your sphere light is set as invisible. Okay, so now what we'll do is run an interactive render. Now before I run an interactive render, what I'll do is I'll go to my light mix settings and I'll group by instances. What it would do is it would group all the sphere lights together and group all the omni lights together, and I don't have to change them individually in the Vray interactive render. Alright, so now let's run an interactive render. Okay, so now the problem is it's blown out because it's gone back to the original light settings. So we need to copy the light settings from this render. Let's stop the render and load this in. Now if I go to source light mix, you can see these are the values that we need to use. So I'm going to save this light mix setting out. So click on save. I'm going to call this light gen dome setting. And then when I run an interactive render again, I'll simply click on load and then load this light setting in. So let's do that again. Let's click on load and then load the setting. Okay, still not reading. Maybe we have to stop the render and then try loading it again. The reason why it was not able to load is because the name of the light gen here is different. So in this case, we will simply have to use the same values in the render. So what I'll do is I'll take a screenshot using the green screen plugin, which I've installed from Google. So take a screenshot, keep it to the side somewhere. And then when you run an interactive render, just simply use that screenshot settings. So 0.158 here, 0.124 here, and 0.616 here. Still seems a bit bright. And the reason is because the color is not dark. So let's make the color dark as well. Alright, great. Now what I'll do is change the color of the interior lights. So I'm going to go to my sphere light here and make it sort of warm. So you can see it becomes warm inside. And do the same for the Omni light as well. And then of course you can increase the lighting inside. You can also copy the colors. So for example, to make it warm, you can just copy the Kelvin temperature and then paste it here. Alright, so we placed our artificial lights as well. It's looking alright. Let me just add this to the history VFP. So if I do a before and after, you can see this is the render without lights and this is the render with lights. Now we'll have to, of course, further improve this render, and that comes from adding trees, adding an atmosphere, adding people, cars, and bringing the render to life. Most of you end up creating a render like this, which is okay, but the more realism you add to the render, the better the render will look. So we will be tackling that in the future videos. I'll see you guys in the next video. Cheers. Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, we're going to set the context for our building so that the render looks better, because with context and setting the right theme with trees, figures and more, your render would look drastically better. So let's start off by adding some trees in our scene. So I'm going to go to my Chaos Cosmos browser and add some trees. So let's go to 3D models and let's go to vegetation. So we have different categories. Let's select trees. And now I'm going to bring in some trees. So you can go ahead, download and then import it to your Sketchup file. So if you click on import, then it would switch to the Sketchup window and then you can place your tree anywhere in the scene. So I'm just going to sort of zoom in, place one here behind the scene. And let's go to another tree and select another tree. Maybe this American peach, the green version as well. About 4 to 5 trees should work well for our scene. Alright, so I've added decent amount of trees, and as always I'm going to assign these trees to a tag. So I'm going to create a tag called trees and then select all of these trees. Use the control button to multi-select trees and then use the tag tool. So select the tag tool and then apply the tag. So if you go to entity info, you can see that all of them belong to trees. Okay, great. So now the manual way of placing trees is to use the move and then the copy. And then also it's a good idea to rotate them, because it's good to add variation. Also a good idea to scale them. So this is the manual way. Now I'll show you a cool way to add trees, and the faster way is by using a plugin called Skatter 2. Now this is a paid plugin, but you get a 15-day trial license. You can check links in our master resource sheet and download the same plugin. So what you need to do is first create a new composition. So click on new composition. And I'm going to call this tree composition. So let's first add the host. So the host is going to be this ground here. So click on pick a surface and select the host. So now you can see that it's going to scatter multiple objects around this surface. So let's reduce the amount that we're going to scatter, because trees are big. So we can go here to the density and sort of reduce the density. So you can see that it reduces. And now I will add the trees. So to add the trees, you need to add it to your scattered objects list. So let's click on pick a new object and select the trees. You can still see that it's a little too much for the ground. So I'm going to reduce the density a bit more. Right, this should work. Let's select the other ones as well. So pick the other trees. So each time you pick a new tree, it's going to assign a new color to that bounding box. we've selected 5 or 6 trees. I think there are 6 trees here. So you can see it shows up here. And here what you can do is you can change the probability of a certain tree. Say, for example, you want to show the maple tree 50%. And in this case, the other trees would show up in the maple trees case. So you can sort of reduce the probability of certain trees and keep white oak as the prominent one. You can also play around with the scale, translation, and rotation. So if I click on this random scale option here, if I toggle that on, you can see that it changes the size of the trees. And you can also mention the size that you want to randomly transform. And you can also mention the minimum and maximum values you want the trees to scale. So let's say it starts from 60 and it goes all the way to 130. We can also randomly translate, which basically means it will move around the XY coordinates to a certain distance. So here in this case, it's in inches. So you can move it from the center point to a certain distance of say 36 inches. It's not a good idea to change the Z. So I'm going to leave Z as is. And I'm also going to randomly rotate it. So how cool is that? We've generated our trees. Now before you click on generate, it's a good idea to make sure you switch on render only so that it will show up only in the render and not in the Sketchup window. Because if it shows up in the Sketchup window, it will make the Sketchup file size heavier. Now, in case you want to reduce the trees at a certain patch in the ground, in that case, you can add a mask. So I'm going to add a paint mask. So click on paint mask. I'm going to increase the brush size. I'm going to paint here. And yeah, that should suffice. Paint here as well. The trees are only being added in the mask. So what you need to do is invert the mask. So we have an option here to invert it. So if you click on this button here, which says this mask is inclusive, click to make it exclusive. So now it would invert it. There wouldn't be any trees added to this area. Maybe this area as well. So let me just edit this and add some more here. Yeah, and you can see that the trees go away. How cool is that? And finally, you can click on generate. So now if I go to my scene 1, so there are some trees which show up here. We can, this generally happens because as the trees to the origin point. So what you need to do is, this is a locked object. So right click and click on lock and then just move it to the side. So Skatter generally adds the scattered objects of the composition to the origin point of your scene. Alright, great. And I can also hide the trees because I guess the trees are going to be generated from the composition editor. As you can see the trees here. And now let's run an interactive render. Alright, so we have some trees in here. Now let's say you want to add a particular tree to a certain point. I may want to add some here at the back, maybe some at the front as well. So let's stop the interactive render. Let's edit the composition again. And let's place some trees. So you can click on this pick position to insert object. And then you can sort of place trees here, here, maybe around here as well. So it would add a tree automatically to your scene. I'm going to place some trees at the back. So the more trees you add at the background, the better the render looks. You can also, of course, delete the points. So you can click on remove points and then sort of remove this point. So you can do multiple things with the Skatter 2 plugin. And then finally, once you're done, click on generate. Let's go back to scene 1 and then render this render again. I'm going to leave the existing trees as is. Let's see what kind of an effect it has on the scene. Great. This looks much better. You have a nice background of trees. You can sort of see the sky as well. Some background here. And now I can do is also add a compound wall, just in case I don't want to see much of the background. Or you can leave it as is. That's up to you. So I'll do that in the next video. So this is a quick video to adding trees in Vray for SketchUp using the Skatter 2 plugin. You guys can go ahead and add other objects as well. For example, rocks, plants, and so on, and experiment with this awesome plugin called Skatter 2. Alright, so in the next video, I'll be editing the materials because the materials are sort of making the render look not that great. As you can see, it doesn't look that too great because of the existing material. So we'll sort of edit the materials and then we'll come back to finishing the scene. So I'll see you guys next video. Cheers. Also, don't forget to add this to the HTVFP. Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, we're going to set up the materials for our model. Now, before I proceed with this model, I forgot to save the previous model, so I had to redo the trees again. So if I go to my composition editor and click on edit, you can notice that the trees are coming only in the path of the camera. So if you want to set this up, all you need to do is to just scroll down in the Skatter composition editor, and under camera, you just need to switch on exclude non-visible and also set the scene. In my case, I've set the scene as scene 1. So if you do this, the trees will only show up within the camera view and will also reduce the tree polygon count in your model. So I hope this helps. This is a quick hack for y'all. Alright, so now let's get back to the model and start with our materials. Alright, so the first step, what I'm going to do is I'm going to save all the existing materials to the same folder as the model. So I'm going to go to extensions, Vray, and click on file path editor. So now you can notice that all these materials are yellow in color, which means that they're not saved and they're in a temporary location. Now, if you want to see which of these materials are in a temporary location, you can just go to that material, click on the bitmap, and you can notice the symbol. So you can see that the file cannot be found. So we will need to save these materials. So let's do that. So let's go to extensions, Vray, file path editor. Select all these materials, including these. We can save the dome lights as well to a particular folder. And then we can right click and click on archive and repath. Now I'm going to simply create a folder called maps in our exercise files and select this folder. So now it will start saving and archiving the previous bitmap. So you can see all of them are saved. And now if I check the bitmap for this material, you can see that symbol goes away. Alright, great. Alright, so we're going to start off by running an interactive render and fix the basic materials in this model. For example, the walls, the bars here, and then the steel framing and so on. So let's go to Asset Editor, go to Settings, and run an interactive render. Now, if you have a really good system, you can also run an interactive render within the Vray viewport. So you can just go here and click on Viewport Render from the Vray toolbar. So now you can see that it's running interactive render directly in the Vray viewport. So let's just zoom in and then start fixing the materials. Alright, so the first material that I'm going to fix is this red iron bar here. I don't like this dark red color. So I'm going to make it sort of black, or yeah, I'm going to keep it black and match it with the iron bars here. So let's go to Asset Editor. So this is the red material here. Or we can also tone down the red by adding a bump map and so on. So let's first add a bump map. So let's go to bump and let's add maybe a splat material. So you just need to go to bump, go to the texture slot here, and let's add a splat material. Alright, so here it is, the splat material. Now let's just go back. So now you can see that it comes on the surface. You can make the material kind of darker by moving this to the left. That makes it slightly darker. Let's add a reflection as well. And let's reduce the glossiness. This is a little too much. Let me see how this looks. Yeah, you can see that sort of a repeating pattern. So what I'll do is I'll stop the render. And I would like to check the binding in this material. For example, I want to see how big the texture is. If it's only a color, I don't really see how much of the area it is being added to. So to change the binding, let's go to binding here and change the texture mode from auto to texture helper. Alright, you can see that so one part of this texture is only so much. So I can increase the size of the material. So let's select the material, go to the material editor and the default ray. Click on edit and let's maybe change this to 5 feet or 60 inches. So now you can see it becomes sort of bigger. So now you should see the bump effect more pronounced on this steel bar as well. So let's run an interactive render again. So let's click on the viewport render. So you can see a much more pronounced effect since the material got bigger. So in that case, we will need to reduce the size of our bump here. So let's go to bump here and let's see if we can reduce the size. So now you can see it comes all over the plate. That's cool. And I can reduce the iterations, play around with the threshold, just give a bit of this spots here and there. So you can play around with these settings, and once you feel that you have a good effect, you can leave it as is. So what it does is it'll sort of pronounce the white areas in this bitmap and leave the black areas as is. So you can see this sort of goes in the black area and the white areas sort of come out. Now you can also mix this with another material. So you can right click, go to wrap in and click on mix map. And then you can add a noise map, for example. So let's add noise. Let's try noise A. And here again, you can sort of play with the various values. Make it more frequent, increase the amplitude, and so on. And then when you go back, it sort of merges with the two maps. And then you can show a particular map more than the other by dragging this mix map slider to the left or right. Alright, and then when you go back, let me just zoom out. You can see that it applies all over the material. But if you want to reduce the bump amount, if it's a little too much, you can just reduce it here. So now it's very subtle as well. We can also copy this. So let's copy this and paste it in the reflection glossiness map. So right click, paste this copy. And if you want to reduce the effect of this bump on the texture, you can right click on it, go to wrap in and click on color corrections, reduce the saturation and sort of reduce the contrast and the brightness as well. So you can do the same for the bump, or you can reduce the bump amount here. Alright, and finally I'm going to change the color because I don't really like red. Let's go for something more darker. Alright, that looks better. You can see that it's sort of stretched. The texture is sort of stretched from this corner to that corner. So I'm just going to enter this group and click on triplanar projection world. And now it should sort of uniformly be scaled. And you can also reduce the size this time. So let's say 2 feet. So it takes like one full box here. Now let's keep it to 3 feet. And let's run an interactive render again. So click on the viewport render. Alright, that looks much better. You can see that we don't have any weird big shapes. But from this here, let's see what that is. Stop the render. I'm going to press J to toggle visibility. Looks fine. It seems to be a reflection from a certain material. Let's run an interactive render again and just reduce the reflection amount. Or let's run the interactive render in the viewport itself. So let's click on viewport render. So this is coming from the trees or the reflection on the other side. So let's see what that is. It can be the environment, the trees, or just basically anything. You can see that it's actually coming from this horizon line here. So if you had a HDRI or say any other material, that would take care of it. Or you can sort of reduce the reflection amount as well. So let's reduce the reflection amount. So if I reduce the reflection amount, you can see that goes away. Or you can also go enter this and sort of reduce the contrast, the brightness. Yeah, once you're done reducing this, you can go back to reflection and reduce reflection to 0. So you can see that that sort of goes away. So that is basically happening because of the reflection from the environment and other parts. But let's give some amount of reflection, doesn't matter since it won't be seen in the render. So you can see the more reflection I give, the more it is reflecting the environment. For example, these trees, so the tree color comes on the material. So you need to understand reflections a lot to give good materials in Vray for SketchUp. You can also increase the metalness to make it more of a metallic material. You can just leave the metalness to 1. And we can also give a IOR value. So you can switch on IOR. And generally iron materials have an IOR of 1.006. I will be sharing the table with y'all, which you can use. And you can refer that table to give the right IOR values to different materials. Alright, so we've created our iron material. So I'm going to rename this. Call this A_ion. All right. And now we can apply the same material to these top bars as well. So I'm going to select the top bar. So if you are in the Sketchup viewport render, you can select the material directly from here. So you can activate the bucket tool, press hold Alt on your keyboard, and then click on the material. So you can see that it changes here. So let's follow the same steps to create the same material. So let's make it more darker. Let's go to reflection, give some reflection and some glossiness. And let's go to bump and let's try some other materials, maybe noise B. So click on noise B and just give it a bit for it to update. Let's increase the size, decrease the size that is, and let's maybe play around with the phase. You can also change the type from regular to fractal to turbulence, but I think regular should work fine. You can also play with the levels here, which blends between the two colors. So I think this should be fine. Let's blend it with another material. So we need to add a mix map. So right click, go to wrap in and click on mix map. So the noise material gets added to the bottom. Now let's add something else. Let's go for maybe marble. Let's change the color of this red to black. And you can play with the settings here as well. Whatever works. And once you're done playing with these settings, you can go back. So now you can see it blends with the noise texture. And you have a nice crack on the material. We can of course reduce the size of this. So in that case, you can increase the amplitude maybe. Yeah, something like this. Go back. And now we can show more of the left or the right. So let's keep it somewhere in between. Should be fine. And then let's go back again. So this is added to the bump material. And let's make it slightly brighter. And let's copy this and let's paste it in reflection glossiness. If you're using 3ds Max, we have something called the slate editor where you can sort of connect nodes and create the materials. SketchUp doesn't have that feature yet, so you will have to use the default way of creating materials, which is by adding color corrections control or other stuff on top of these layers. So it's stacked as layers. Now if you want to move a layer to a certain hierarchy or to a higher hierarchy or to the top of the table, then what you can do is, for example, if I want to move only this noise map and remove this other stuff, then I can right click, copy, and then go back and then simply paste it in here. So right click, paste as copy. So now that mix map goes away and it's only the noise that remains. All right, great. Let's make this darker even more. Now you should note that if you have a very dark material, you won't be able to see the bump as much as compared to a brighter material. Alright, that looks fine. Let's check the binding for this material as well. So let's stop the interactive render, go to binding and change the texture mode from auto to texture helper. So you can see it's pretty small, so you won't really see the bump effect, or you may have to change the size of the bump. But I would recommend that you change the size of the binding instead. So let's select this material. It's already selected. And we can change the size here. So let's try 60 inches, 5 feet. And let's run an interactive render from the viewport. Alright, so now you can see the bump or the inundations on the material. So you can see these parts here. Now if you want to make it less pronounced, you can of course reduce the bump amount and that would make it less pronounced. Alright, I'm happy with the material, so I'm going to leave it as is and let's go back to scene 1 and see the progress that we made so far. Now a small tip for y'all is that if you're now going to be rendering a high resolution render, for example a 4K render, then you don't really need to add a lot of bump or additional bitmaps and stuff. You can just change the color, add some reflection, and you can let it go. But it's a good idea to sort of play around with materials because it gives you more creative capabilities and you can extend your creative capabilities even further as you're learning something new, playing with materials and creating something awesome as well. Alright, so I hope you found this video useful. You're done with the steel bars or the plinth beams. And you can see that the render looks good already. In the next video, we will fix the glass material and the wall material as well. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Cheers. Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, we're going to fix the glass material and this wall material here as well. So I'm going to select the glass material using the sample paint. So you can see that it's a Doric matte sieve. So it's an image applied on top of this material. So you can see like this is the sort of material that they've created. So we're going to try to replicate the same material. We can also take a screenshot of this and keep it on the side and then refer this every now and then to create this material. If you want to see the material better, you can sort of make it darker. You can reduce the opacity or increase the opacity. So now you can see this material. So let's take a screenshot of this, open it, and we can leave it as is for reference. Alright, so to start off, I'm going to select this material, go to Asset Editor. I won't be running an interactive render yet. I will sort of change the basic stuff first and then change the material. So rename this, call this A_glass blocks. And let's remove the texture because we don't need it. So cut or clear, and that will remove the texture. Go to reflection, increase reflection. Go to refraction and increase refraction to full. Yeah, let's clear it. So right click clear. Yeah, that should get rid of that material there. And that should make it opaque as well. So you should note that if it's opaque in Sketchup, it won't really show here. So let's move this to the left and now you can see our material. Alright, great. And now let's run interactive render. So I'm going to click on the viewport render here. Where's that? Viewport render. So now it's a simple glass that's sort of where you can see through. And there's no much reflections because there's nothing to reflect opposite this material. So we'll fix that quickly. So you can see there's nothing opposite except for the sky there. So you can fix that as well by adding some objects opposite the window. But for now, we need to fix the actual material. So let's go to the settings here. Let's start off by adding a bump. So you just need to go to the texture slot and let's add a mix map. So click on mix map. So the top layer, I'm going to click on texture slot and I'm going to add tiles. So click on tiles and I'm going to change the color tile to white. So click on white. And I'm going to change the mortar or the grouting to black. So just change the slider to the left. So that will make it black. So now you can see the lines in the material, all these lines here. So now let's reduce the vertical count. So let's make the vertical count to 1. So it makes it as 4 lines. So 1, 2, 3, 4. But there are many lines here. We can fix that in the binding. So let's go back. To make it sort of an translucent material, I can add something at the color bottom. So let's click on color bottom texture slot and let's add a noise. So let's click on noise B. So now it make it sort of opaque, but we can fix that. All right, so we've added our noise. Let's use the default settings. Let's go back and let's drag the slider to the right so you can see less noise in the material. Alright, so now you can see that it's sort of frosty in nature. Don't drag it all the way to the right. Just leave it a little bit to the left so that you get that frosty effect. And don't drag it all the way to the left. Otherwise it will make it more opaque. So I'm just going to drag it to the right a bit. I'm going to leave it as is. This looks fine. Let's go back. And now we need to fix the binding on this material. So let's stop the interactive. So you can stop it from here. And then what you need to do is you need to switch on binding. I change this to texture helper. Now, if you don't see the texture helper, it's because opacity is set at 0. So just increase the opacity. And now you can see the texture helper. So you can see that it's sort of weird. It's not sort of aligned properly. So let's enter this group. Select this glass block and click on triplanar projection world. And we can also click on triplanar projection fit. It fits the glass block properly. And now what we can do is run an interactive render, or viewport render that is. And we can see that we've created a nice looking glass block material. How cool is that? Now the problem is that this component here is not a component. So you will have to individually change the position, change the wrapping of the material for each of these blocks. Or what you can do is you can select this block, right click, click on make component, call this glass block typical. And then we can delete these. Just move this to the left and right. So just move this to the right by 2 and move this to the left by 2. So we have 1 and we'll have to delete all of these. So let's select all of these. Or just let's leave the, because I don't know the distance, or you can draw a guide. So let's draw a guide from there and let's draw a guide from here. And now we can delete these. Let's leave a guide here. So I'm just going to draw a guide here. And I'm going to draw a guide here as well. I'm using the tape measure tool, draw the guides. Right, cool. So now what I can do is, I can delete all of these. And I can copy this to the top, multiply by 2, copy this to the bottom, and multiply by 6 or 8. Right, cool. Luckily, this is a component, so it reflects all of those. We'll have to fix these here as well. So I'll draw another guide here this way, another guide here. Let's enter this group, select all of these, delete them, and select all of these and copy it to the other side. I'm locking it to the right axis as well when I'm copying. So I've copied it to the other side. Right, that looks good. May have to move this to this edge because the spacing here is a little different. So let's move it to this edge here. So do the same for all of these. Seems to be the same size. Yeah, definitely seems to be the same size. And again, we have to delete the stuff, copy it again, draw the guide first, then delete these, and then copy this from this corner. Okay, let me just copy that again, over to the guide. And now we can copy it properly. So bring it down. All right. And then we need to multiply by 8 or 9. All right, we're done. Let's see how this glass block looks now. So let's run an interactive render from the viewport. All right, great. That looks good. Let's make it more frosty. Well, it looks fine. Yeah, it looks fine. Maybe you can add a bulge effect on the glass. So let's refer that material. So you can see it's got like some sort of a bulge effect. So you can add that as well. Yeah, so this is how it looks. So it's pretty decent. So to add the bulge effect, it's pretty simple. Just open your asset editor. And let's create a mix map again on top of this mix map. So it's a mix map on top of a mix map. So right click, go to wrap in and click on mix map. And then here you can just add just scroll to the bottom and click on bulge. So now you get that bulgy sort of an effect on the render, on the material. Let's go back and let's increase this to the right. So the bulge is not too much, just a little bit. So you can see that bulge effect there. Now if you want to reduce the bulge effect, of course you can reduce the bump amount here. And then that reduces the bulge effect. How cool is that? I think I'm not going to go with the bulge effect, but that's a quick hack for you guys in case you want to play around with that. So what I will do is I will copy this, just paste it on top. So you get rid of the bulge effect layer. Now, if you want to make it more opaque, then just enter the texture slot, just drag the slider to the left. So that would make it sort of more opaque. So you can see the frostiness on the glass as well. I'm going to keep it in between and this should suffice. Alright, so this is a pretty long video, so I'm going to stop it here. But I hope you guys found this video useful. You can play around materials and create something awesome like this. Create your own kind of effect with the settings within Vray. You don't have to use any bitmap. You can just use the settings within Vray and create some awesome materials like this. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Cheers. Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, I'm going to fix the reflections for our glass material and show some reflections on the glass as well. So first thing is to check this material. So let's select this material. It's translucent glass gray. Let's go to asset editor. Let's select it again because sometimes it doesn't get selected. So now you can see it's selected. And now let's open the properties or the parameters for this material. So you can see there's no reflection for this glass. So let's add reflection. And the refraction is full. Maybe increase it a bit more. You can also check the IOR values online for this glass material and use the appropriate IOR material. But this regular glass reflection should work well as well. And you can change the diffuse to black. So we fix that material. Let's see if there's any other materials that we need to fix. So I'm going to go to layers, tags that is, and switch off walls exterior and windows. And let's fix the staircase material as well because yellow looks awkward. Let's keep it black. Let's add some reflection. reduce the glossiness, keep it fully metallic. And let's add a bump as well. It's a good idea to add a bump to all your materials, although it's going to be a less amount. Let's try maybe stucco this time. So you can, this kind of an effect. If you want to sort of reduce the size of this, you can go to texture placement and you can go to repeat UV and change this to say 0.1 by 0.1. So that would make it big. And if you want to make it small, just type in 2 by 2. So now that would make it small as well. Let's try 5 by 5. Let's go back. You can see the bump is applied on the material. Let's check the material size here as well. So let's go to Asset Editor, go to Binding, change the texture mode to Texture Helper. You can see it is not uniform and it is, the UVs are not placed properly. So I'm just going to enter this group, select all this material, click on Triplanar Projection World. So now it's wrapped in correctly. You can go ahead and do the same for the others as well, but I think this should suffice, just the main pole of the staircase. Alright, once you're done with that, I'm also going to increase the size. Let's say 5 feet by 5 feet. So you have a nice big texture there. And let's check the other materials. So maybe this door, just to add some reflections to the door. So I'm going to quickly go ahead and apply all the reflections and so on to the various materials in our scene. The interiors, you don't have to worry too much about the materials, but whichever model shows up in the render, for example, this here, which is a metal aluminum, you can just add some metallic material, reduce the amount, add some reflection. This works well. So it's a good idea to go ahead and add some reflections to all your materials. So I'll quickly do that in a quick time lapse. Now for your fall off map, you can just click on the advanced parameters here, go to sheen, just add some sheen. So that would make it a sort of a cloth material. Add some reflections as well. And you can change the view mode to say fabric. So now you can see that it's a decent fabric material. Sheen is a little too much, so let's reduce the sheen. That looks fine. The fabric material I won't be covering because it's a little complicated. You'll have to add textures to get that fabric effect. I'll show it to you in another workshop. But since it's an exterior render, you don't have to worry too much. But for interior renders, definitely add a lot more fabric materials. Definitely be more detailed with your fabric material. Alright, so this material comes with, it's the same similar material that we created. And anything else? The grass we'll do it later for another video. And this should suffice. Let's just check this material one last time. Yeah, we've added the reflection. Alright, looks good. And let's switch back our tags on. So I'm gonna go to Wall Exteriors, Windows, go back to Scene 1 and run an interactive render. So click on the viewport render. Okay, so now you can see the reflections on the glass here, but let's try to reflect some trees on this glass than just the plain glass. And I also add a bump for this wall material because it's looking a little too plain. So let's stop that, or let's continue running the render and then change the settings for this wall. It's got a cool texture, so you can use the same texture to add the bump as well. Alright, so now you can see the texture there. Let's go to Asset Editor, select this material. So there is no bump map. You can use the same material for the bump map, so copy and paste it to bump. Alright, so now you can see the projections or the bump on the material. Let's reduce the bump amount. And that looks good. We can make this material slightly darker by going to color manipulation and reducing the color gain. So that would make it slightly darker as well. Cool. Now let's go back to Scene 1 and run a viewport render. If you'd like to see before and afters or see the progress of your render, I would recommend that you use the interactive render mode within the Vray frame buffer. But if you're not a big fan of seeing the progress of your render, you can just stick to the Sketchup render and keep progressing with your render. Alright, so now you can see that the materials look better. You can see some reflection on the glass. Now, if you're going to add a tree in front of this building, you can see the reflections on this glass, but you may not see the reflections on this glass so much because this is a frosty glass and they wouldn't reflect as much as a plain glass. So let's add some trees here. So I'll just move this to the left so you can see all these trees. I'm going to move all these trees to the front of the building. Let's see if it's aligned correctly. It is actually selected, so you can move it around. Okay, so this seems to be right in front. You can make a copy this side, make a copy this side as well. This tree went to the bottom, so you'll have to just move it on top. Okay, that's fine. It won't really be seen in the viewport. in the main render, so you don't have to worry. And it's a good idea to give the trees at a certain height as well, because it would sort of reflect the shadows on the wall. And we can adjust the sun settings of the scene as well. So let's go back to scene 1. Alright, so now let's run an interactive render again. Let's check how the render looks. Great, so now you can see some tree reflections on the glass here. How cool is that? And you can also see it here, but it's very subtle. Alright, so now we'll go back to our interactive render and use the original lighting system, which was a dark lighting system, and set up for night render. So let's run an interactive render here, so that shows up in the Vray frame buffer. Alright, so it's a little too dark, so I'm going to increase the dome light settings. So you can see the reflections, but once you switch on the sphere light, it sort of reduces the reflection. So you'll have to reduce the sphere light to see those reflections again. You can see these trees here on the glass, and you can increase the dome light settings. So I'm going to increase the dome light. I'm going to right click on the dial to make it sort of brighter, and this is good to go. So now you can see the reflections of the glass, some nice materials, and we just need to fix the ground and so on. So I'll fix the ground and other stuff in the next videos. Also, don't forget to add this to the history VFB. So stop the render, add a denoiser, and add it to the history VFB. So if you do a before and after, so this is A, this is B, you can see how much we've progressed with the materials as well. How cool is that? So I'll see you guys in the next video. Cheers. And now let's just play around with the sun settings. I'm going to go to my shadows. So let's stop the render, switch on shadows. Right, so you can see that the sunlight is falling this way, so that's why you don't see any light on the building. So let's edit the sunlight. Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, I'm going to show you how you can use various lighting systems within Vray and how the lighting differs between viewport rendering and the Vray interactive. So I'm going to start off by running an interactive render here. So let's click on the viewport render. So you can notice that this render comes out a bit brighter, and that's the reason why you don't see the insides or the lighting inside, and doesn't read the light mix values as well. Whereas the Vray interactive render, you can see that reads light mix values inside, and it shows a same sort of lighting system. So it reads the dome light, but it doesn't read the values from the light mix. So you need to keep that in mind when you are using both the viewport rendering and the Vray interactive render. But the final render output would definitely be your Vray interactive, and you will have to set it up within the Vray interactive. Now what I'm going to do is I'll show you how you can use various lighting systems. So for example, if you want to use the sunlight and along with the dome light and the environment light, you can do that as well. First thing is you need to switch on the shadows and set the right shadow setting in this scene. So you can see the shadows are falling this way, but I need to make the shadows fall on the building. So what I'll do is I'll go to my shadows here and change the daytime. You need to understand where the shadows are falling as well. So, or you need to understand where the north angle is. For example, here, the north angle is here. So if this is north, then we need to have the morning sun so that it falls on the building. So let's go back to scene 1 and let's change it to the morning sun. So around 9 a.m. should be fine. And let's update the shadow settings by updating the scene. Alright, so we set up the sunlight. Now we just switch on the sunlight as well. So let's go to our sunlight settings here. Go to sunlight and switch this on. And we can also switch on the environment light. We have the light mix settings, so we can switch off and switch on certain lights using the light mix settings. So now I won't be using the viewport render. I'll use Vray interactive VFB, interactive render, because I can adjust the light mix settings. So let's run an interactive render. So now you can see that the light falls on the building, which is pretty cool. And you can sort of adjust it in interactive as well. So for example, if I change the shadows here or change the month, for example, it should change in the interactive. So you can see it changes. So let's make it morning sun around 8 a.m. It looks nice. Let's change it to maybe December, longer shadows. But if you'd really like to see, then I would recommend that you switch on the shadows and adjust it here first, so that you know where it's falling. Alright, so now you can see some tree shadows on the wall. If you want to have some more tree shadows, then you can do that as well by adding more trees on the side of the building. So for example, let's go back to scene 1. What I'll do is I'll lock the viewport because I don't want the Vray interactive to change. So you can click on the lock viewport here, lock camera orientation. And then I'll sort of orbit, and it doesn't really affect the scene here. And if you want more shadows, what you can do is just place a tree here so that the shadow falls on the tree first and then on the building. So let's have longer shadows. So now you can see the shadows falls in the entire building. So this is 8:44, 9:44. Let's change the time here. All right, looks good. Maybe just move this a bit to the right. You can also rotate it and check. You can also add some additional trees, or you can also move this tree on top if you want more shadows. So for example, you can move it up by say 5 feet. So now you can see the trees fall on this part of the building. You can move it in. So it's all about playing trees to create that shadow effect. You can also create multiple trees. So if I create another tree on the red axis, that makes it darker, so I'll just move it out. That looks pretty cool. Let's move it in. So it's all trial and error till you find the best shadow by adjusting your trees. And then of course, if you want softer shadows, then you will have to adjust the sun settings. So just go to sunlight here and change the size multiplier to say 10. Then you will get softer shadows, but you wouldn't see the shape of the tree. So maybe keep it around 5, and 5 works well as well. So now you can see the shape of the tree coming in. Alright, this looks nice. Some soft shadows on the walls, and it percolates onto the glasses as well. Cool. So now we have our shadows here. So what I'll do, I'll stop the render. Now what you can do is you can play with the shadows here. So for example, if you switch off the environment light goes off. You switch off the sunlight goes off, and now it's only the dome light setting. And then you can save this out as only dome lights. And if you want only the sunlight and environment light, you can do that as well. Switch on the sunlight and environment light and switch off the dome light settings. Alright, so now you can see that I've switched off the dome lights, but the background has come as dark. So you should notice that the environment light and dome light don't work together. So you either need to work only with the environment light, or you need to work only with the dome light. But of course, you can use the sunlight for both the dome light and the environment light. Now, if you want to fix this, what you need to do is you just need to go to your asset editor, go to lights, and then switch off all the dome lights. So now when you switch off all the dome lights and run an interactive render, you can see the background, which is coming from the environment light. So that's a quick tip in case you guys see that black screen, is because you're using both the environment light and the dome light together. Of course, you can use the sunlight for both the environment light and the dome light as well. So for the rest of the course, I'll just use the dome light and the sunlight together. The environment light won't be used for the rest of the course. So let's switch on the dome lights. So I'll switch on the dome lights. And then if I run an interactive render again, you will see the background changing. You can see that the color changes in the background. And if I switch off all the dome lights, the background becomes dark. So you won't be using the environment light for the rest of the course, and it will only be between the dome light and the sunlight. How cool is that? So you don't really need to worry about these shadows here. We'll fix that. And we'll fix the road, the grass, and add some additional entourage like car, people, and make this render come to life. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Cheers. Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, we're going to create our roads for this awesome model. And we're also going to create a wet road. So we're going to create a wet road by using a blend material rather than the simple generic material. So first thing what we need to do is draw our rectangle to make the road, and I'll also assign these trees to a tag. So let's select all these trees, go to tags here, create a tag called tree, then use the tag tool and assign these trees. So now if you switch them off, it all goes away. We were unable to assign this to trees because it's locked. So right click and then click on unlock. And now if you assign these to trees, it should go away. It goes away. All right. So now we'll draw a rectangle. So let's draw a rectangle, make it a group and apply a material. So before I apply a material, I just want to share something. So for example, if I move this to the right and I'll apply a color material. So let's go to colors here and just apply this material. And now what if I scale this? Now, for example, if I scale this way, or if I make it even longer, what happens is it stretches the UVs. As in when you scale stuff, you need to use the triplanar projection world. Now, for a better understanding, if I go to my asset editor, select this material and change the binding from texture mode auto to texture helper. And if I scroll in, you can see that the texture gets elongated. And generally, for placing good textures, you need a uniform texture. So if you want a uniform texture, just click on triplanar projection world. So that's a quick tip for you guys in case you see some weird textures in your renders. Alright, so I'll delete this because I'm going to use the Vray blend material. But let's just draw a rectangle and then scale this. We can make it uniform later as well. I made it a group as well. And since it's merging with the grass face, we'll give it some thickness. So let's enter the group and give a thickness of about 1 inch. Should be fine. So now it's not merging with the grass face. And this is a jolly pattern. So let's enter the group. Give some thickness for this as well. So it's above the ground. Should be fine. It doesn't matter if it intersects because it won't be seen in the render. So now let's create our blend material. So let's go to Asset Editor, right click on Generic and click on Blend. Let's rename this material, call this blend main, and let's create 2 new materials. So you can see that the blend material has a base and then it has various coats. So this coat is what will create the wet effect on the road. So let's create the asphalt material first. So let's right click on generic, rename this, call this blend base. And let's create the coat materials as well. We'll of course change it. So right click generic, rename, call this blend coat water. Alright, so for your asphalt material, we're going to add a bitmap. So let's go to our sketchuptextureclub.com website, go to asphalt. So you'll find it under architecture, roads, asphalt, and you can select any of these materials. Let's select this material here, download and then bring it to Vray. So let's go to bump and add the bump texture slot. So click on bitmap. You find asphalt here, open this up. You can make it rendering space linear. If you go back, it will add some bump to it. If you want a more pronounced bump, you can go to color manipulation and you can sort of reduce the color gain as much as you can do, but it's best to add a color corrections control. So right click, go to wrap in, click on color corrections control, reduce this to black and white, increase the brightness a bit, but increase the contrast. All right, so that should add the bump to this material. Let's also copy this, enter the group and copy this bitmap and paste it in the diffuse as well. If you want to make this darker, you can just go to enter the group, go to color manipulation and sort of reduce the color gain to make it darker. So that makes it darker. Let's apply the base material, which is blend base asphalt. So let's scroll down and select blend base asphalt. So now let's apply this material to the road. So apply, And we'll have to increase the scale of this texture. So let's click on edit and let's say 50 feet. So that's a pretty big scaling. So maybe 25 feet. You can also sort of scale it by entering the group, selecting the face, right click, go to texture position and use the green pin to scale it to this edge. Right click and click on done. Alright. So now let's go to asset editor. Now let's add the coat. So the coat will be the water material. So let's go to coat water. Let's make this diffuse dark or black and let's increase reflection and refraction. So this is our water material. You can add some tint as well. So you can go to fog color and make it blue if you like. But I think this should work fine as well because it will reflect the environment. Now we need to go back to main and add this as a coat. So click on coat and add the asphalt or the water material. So let's go to A, blend coat, water. So now this will create a coat on the material. So let's run an interactive render and see how this looks. So let's click on viewport render. So you can see that the entire road is pretty reflective. So if I switch off the coat, the reflection goes away and it's sort of more whitish in color. That's because of the reflection happening on the base material. So let's go to our base material and make it darker here. The light is a little too much, so this is why you're seeing this as is. So let's maybe switch off the sunlight and now you can see the material better. So let's go to blend base asphalt and make this sort of darker by reducing the gain. So now you can see that the asphalt material shows up in Vray. So if you make it darker, it will show up. Alright, so now you can see that it's darker. So you should note that if you add a texture slot to your diffuse texture here, these sliders wouldn't really affect the image or the material. It's because it's reading from this material here. So if you want to change this material further or you want to change the darkness or lightness, you can either change it from color manipulation here by making it brighter or darker. Or you can also add a color corrections control. So right click, go to wrap in and click on color corrections. And here you can sort of make it more contrasty, more bright or dark, whatever you like. Alright, so let's just zoom in a bit to see our material. So you can see the cracks and stuff. It's kind of visible. So the asphalt material looks good. And now let's switch on the water material. So let's go to main and then switch on the coat water material. Now this would make the road more reflective. If it's not showing up, then you'll have to restart the render. So let's just restart the render. So now you can see that road becomes super reflective. But we need the water only at certain parts of the road. So to do that, you can use the blend material texture slot. So I'm going to add a texture slot, or you can also reduce this. So if you see, if I reduce this, the reflection reduces, or we can add a texture. So we can click on the texture slot, scroll down and let's maybe add noise A. You can also play around with the other textures. So let's try smoke. So now this is completely white and that's why it's super reflective. So what we'll do is we'll play around with the settings here. You don't really need to know each of these settings. You just need to play around with it. Alright, this looks fine. Now I'll go back and I'll add color corrections to this texture. So let's click on color corrections. Make it black and white and let's increase the contrast. So what happens is the white parts would be the reflective parts and the black parts would be the less reflective ones. So let's go to the texture and invert this texture. So let's go to color manipulation and click on invert texture. Or what we can do is make color A as black and color B as white. That can also be done instead of using texture. Right, this seems fine, but still not seen. Right, so this works fine. So you can see that the white parts will be reflective. Now what I'll do is I'll blend this with some other material as well. So let's go back and right click here, click on wrap in and click on mix map. And let's add maybe a noise texture. Noise textures also work well and you can simply use noise together. So the black parts are the parts where the road texture will be seen and the white parts is where the water or the reflective part of the road will be seen. So now let's go back. So now you can see it's both of them are mixed together really well. So let's see more of the, alright, this looks fine. Now I need to boost the white material and let's add a Bezier curve. So right click, go to wrap in, click on Bezier curve. You can change the tangent type to free and change it to mono and you can make this more white. So now you can see the reflections happening on the white parts and the black parts as the road texture. So now you can see there's more whites than blacks. So what I'll do is I'll enter this group. So what I did was, instead of using too many textures and making it too complicated, I sort of made it simple. I just used the noise A texture. I use these parameters where the frequency is set at 4.4 and color manipulation is as is, but these are default settings. And then I added a Bezier curve and made the whites more prominent. And now you can see a nice cool water texture on the road. So now if I go back to scene 1, you can see that cool water added on the road. So I hope you guys found this video useful. It was a bit long because I was trying to play around the settings and I was doing this in real time. I did create the material before, but I wanted to play around with the other materials as well. And that's the best part about this course, where I'm creating it in real time, so that if I make mistakes, you guys get to know. And if you follow along with this video and if you create the same mistakes, then you'll know what to do. Oh, by the way, don't forget to add this to the History VFB. So let's run an interactive render in the V-Ray frame buffer. Give it a bit for it to render, add the denoiser as well, and then add it to the History VFB. So now if I do a before and after, you can see that our render is coming to life. Adding a road did create a profound impact on the render. It looks much more better already. Alright, so in the next video, we'll adjust the grass, change some more settings, and then set it up for our final render. I'll see you guys in the next video. Cheers. Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, we're going to create the grass for our landscape here and also add some additional objects. And we're going to use the inbuilt Vray scatter. Now, it's not as robust as Skatter 2, which has a lot of additional features, but it gets the job done. Alright, so first thing is to add the scatter object on our host. And the host in this case is going to be our big plane here. So I hope you know what's the difference between hosts and scattering objects. Host is what is going to host your scattered objects, and the scattered objects is going to be scattered all over this host. So to add a scattered object, you can go to your asset editor and then go to geometries, right click, and you can click on scatter, or you can also select the object here or the group in this case and click on scatter over selection. So click on scatter over selection so you can see that it's created that scatter on this host. And now let's add some grass objects to scatter on this host. So we can add the grass from our Chaos Cosmos library. So open Chaos Cosmos, maximize this, go to online, 3D models, vegetation, and let's click on flowers, grass, and rocks. So you guys can go ahead and select any of these. I'm going to go with grass 0102. So download and import this and place it somewhere in your scene. And let's add something else as well. Maybe these brooms. Click on this, download, and add this in your scene. Let's add one more. So scroll down and let's see what we can add. Maybe this Mexican feather grass. You guys can play around with multiple objects, but for starters, let's just play with 3. And now let's go to our scatter object settings. Click on scatter and let's add our guest. So select all of these hosts, these scattered objects, and add it as a guest. So now you can see that it starts scattering all over this host. There are multiple options. For example, if you scroll down, you can randomly rotate between 0 and 360. If it's 0 to 0, it's uniform in one direction. And if it's 0 to 360, it randomly rotates around from 0 to 360 degrees. So I would leave it as 0 to 360. And you can also change the scale from 0.9 to 1.1. You can also make it smaller from 0.2, but I think 0.9 to 1.1 should work fine for grass. For trees, of course, you can have more extreme values. And then you can leave the guest origin as bounding box bottom center, which is the bottom of each of these objects. And the preview mode, you can change from points, which is like different points around the host, to bounding boxes. You can also decrease the preview percentage, but I would leave it as 100. Now here's the probability. So I would like to see more of the grass than these two objects. So what I will do is I will leave it at 1 and reduce the broom to say 0.2 and keep the Mexican feathers to 0.1. So now you can see grass is more prominent than these other objects. And if you increase the density, you'll see more grass in your scene. Let's reduce the Mexican grass even more, so 0.01 and the broom to 0.02. Alright, so now I can see more grass and this is what I need. You can play around with the values, but make sure your grass is the most prominent one first, and the other ones can be any value that you like and which is not too common. So try to observe your surroundings, and then using your knowledge, you can set the right probabilities. Now if you switch on collision detection, it's going to not intersect with any of the objects, but in landscape generally most objects intersect with each other, so I'm going to leave collision detection as off. Orientation should always be world up. If you switch on along normals also works fine, but world up should be right, and axis filter should be facing up. You can also play around with the seed to create different variations. You can see some objects here and so on. So now let's go back to scene 1 and run a viewport render. So let's click on viewport render. So now you can see our cool looking grass all over the scene. It's covered the roads as well, which is not what we want. So let's fix that quickly. I'm going to stop the interactive render. And I'll have to adjust the host. So this is one of the drawbacks in Vray Skatter, where you can't add exclusion objects, for example, the road, the model, and so on. But in Skatter 2, you have various options. For example, you can randomly transform scale, translation, rotation. And then you can also add masks. So it would be great if Vray can add masks in their own Vray Skatter as well. So with mask, you can sort of exclude certain areas, and which is pretty cool. You can also paint. So Skatter 2 is a great tool for landscape artists, and hopefully in the future, Vray also updates its Skatter feature to something as robust as Skatter Composition Editor or Skatter 2. So to avoid this scattering all over the host, what you need to do is you need to edit the host. So I'm going to switch off the scatter view. You can switch on and switch off the scatter viewer. So let's enter this group, select this line, press J to toggle visibility, and then move it in and sort of edit these lines as well. Delete this. So as soon as you delete a line, you can see that plus sign goes and it's no longer a scatter host. So just something to keep in mind. And let's create a box here, delete this line so that it's not scattered all over the place. Move this as well. Move this to the corner. Let's also move our road to the center. Select this road and move to the center here. And then you can move this line closer. Maybe give something here as well. All right, that looks fine. So it will scatter all over these parts. Let's delete these extra lines here. We don't need them. This looks fine. And now to again apply the scatter, all you need to do is select the host, go to your scatter object under geometries, then right click and click on apply to selection. Now if you want to see the scatter, just switch on scatter here. So now you can see the scatter as well. There's some scattering happening here, scattering happening here. This should work well. So let's go back to scene 1 and then run an interactive render either on the VFB or on the viewport. Alright, so great. You can see some grass here, some bushes. It's looking great. Sort of zoom in and see the detail a bit more. Looks pretty good. So Vray Skatter also does the work, but if you want more flexibility, then Skatter 2 works great as well. You guys can play around with this, see what you can come up with. I encourage you all to play around and boost your creative capabilities with software. Maybe I can just delete this part since it's sort of spilling over. Doesn't look that great. Delete this part of the host as well. Just need to fix that. We're ready to go. Maybe we can show more of the flowers as well. Let's increase the probability of these flowers here. So let's quickly do that. Enter this group. Don't delete it because the host would get deleted. So you can just move this line in. If you see the plus sign, that means the host is still on. And let's go to our scatter settings and increase the broom a bit more. So maybe 0.1. See how this looks. So you can see more yellow flowers here and there. That looks cool. And finally, what I'll do is I'll add a compound wall at the back because I don't want to see the horizon line. It looks kind of weird. I'm going to add a box here. You can make it a group, of course. Enter the group and give a height of say 5 feet. 5 feet is a good compound wall height. Add a brick material. So let's go to Chaos Cosmos. You can also add, if you're short on time, just add materials from here. Instead of creating your own materials, these work well as well. So let's add this brick wall. Enter the group. And let's apply the brick wall material. Search for brick, right click on brick and click on apply to selection. This looks fine. The scale also looks good. Leave it as is. And let's go back to scene 1 and run an interactive render. Right, see how much of an effect that brick wall at the back adds to your scene. You don't see that endless horizon. but you see your focus is on the building here. Cool. So let's add this to the HTVFP and then we'll jump to the next video. We'll finish this course by adding some entourage and then set it up for our final render. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Cheers. Hey guys, welcome back. Now we're going to do some final touches by adding some entourage and also fix certain parts of the model in case there are some issues. For example, there's no ground here, so you can sort of see the bottom. So let's quickly fix that. I'm going to draw a rectangle from this edge to this edge, make it a group, and then I'm going to draw a rectangle from here to here, delete this. All right, let's move this line to this edge. That should suffice. Let's apply this grass material on top. And let's add a scatter on this as well. Let's select this host and click on Add to Scatter. Scatter over selection. All right. Select this. Yeah, so it's added. And let's go to our settings here. Go to Scatter. Scatter 1. You can rename this. Call this Small Scatter. It's a bad name, but you guys can rename it however you like. Right, so Scatter Small. And let's add our host. So let's check for some good materials or models. Maybe just go for this myrtle. So select that. Apply it. That should work fine. And let's add this as the host. So let's go to Small Scatter, Add Guests. So you can see now it's scattering over that face. And I can reduce the scale. So maybe some from 0.2 to say 0.6. So it's pretty small as well. There's no option to offset. I wish there was an option to offset. But anyways, can decrease the density maybe to 0.5, I guess. And maybe reduce the probability as well. Probability doesn't matter because it's just one object in the scene. Doesn't really make sense using scatter here because there's no much features that you can use. So instead, what I would do is just place the object appropriately in the scene. So I'll place it and sort of scale it down. Then move it this way. And just make a copy and place it the other side as well. So we have something happening below the platform here. And then we can delete that other scatter. So you need to make sure what you're scattering because for some scenarios it doesn't really make sense using scatter. Right, so all of that is set. Now let's add some entourage. So let's add a car maybe. So go to Chaos Cosmos, go to Vehicles, Cars. Let's add a van maybe. No cool vans. There are pretty some decent trucks here. I'm just going to stick to cars. And let's see if we have an electric car because the future is electric, right? I like Porsche a lot. Maybe use Porsche as well. Let's just go with this car. Download and place it. Place it somewhere here. Right hand drive. So if you're in Germany, you place your cars on the right. All right. And let's place some people as well. So let's go to people. Standing. Let's place this person. Let's place them inside the scene. So let's place them here and sort of rotate them outside. Cool, that looks good. Move them in a bit. And let's see if we have something else to place. This looks pretty cool as well. So let's place this maybe here, rotate them. All right. That looks good. Is there anything else that we can add? We could change the door. So let's add a door maybe. So let's go to architecture, click on this door, load it in. Delete this. And let's rotate this. Rotate it by 45. Move to the corner. All right, and scale it as well. All right, cool. Is there anything else that we can add? You guys can go ahead and add whatever you like. I think that should be good enough. Let's go back to scene 1 and click on Render with Vray Interactive. So we need to bring our car in a bit. and we're good to go. So our car wasn't in the frame, so let's just move it in. And make sure these cars or whatever you're placing is actually touching the ground. Yeah, it is, because sometimes people tend to add floating objects. So let's go back to scene 1 and click on render with Vray Interactive. Alright, so this is our final render. Now I will be showing you how to change the footpath using mega scans, use the light mix to sort of change this to a night render, and more in the future videos. But let's do a final render because I like this render. In this day shot, everything looks good. Trees look nice, the sky looks nice. The highlight is on the building, the shadows on the wall. We have some elements in the scene which add some life to the scene as well. So this is a ready to go for render image. You could probably change the footpath as a bit. So let's maybe change that because it's showing up as white. So let's check this material. Must be a reflective material, so that's why it's reflecting a lot of light. So let's make it less reflective, and that should sort of fix that. So let's go back to scene 1 and let's check the render finally. We can make it a bit more darker. This looks fine as well. Leave it as is. Alright, great. So to set up our final render, need to go to, let's save this. It's a good idea to save your file before setting up final renders. Then go to your asset editor, go to settings, change this to V-Ray. I use the V-Ray denoiser for my final renders. And let's switch off interactive. We can do the progressive render this time because that's a little bit faster. And you can set the time limit as well. So let's set a time limit to say maybe 15 minutes. So the longer you leave your renders, for example, if you set it as 20 minutes or 30 minutes, the better resolution you get. I have a decent system, so I'm going to keep it at 10 minutes. Let's see what we get in 10 minutes. And the quality can be set at high plus, but it would render fewer passes because it has to reduce the noise. So let's keep it at high. High should do the job as well. And let's change the render output from 360 to say 1500. 1500 should work fine for social media as well. If you're doing it for print, then of course you need to change it to a 4K resolution, maybe 3000, 4000 pixels, work well. You can also add some render elements, but I'll show you how to do that in the VFP post-production video of this course. So this is just a quick update so that we have a product without spending too much time in further. This is just to give you guys a glimpse of what we rendered so far. And then we'll also learn how to use the atmosphere and more in the coming few videos. Alright, so let's render. And I'll see you guys once the render is done. Alright guys, so the render is done. And we got a really nice cool render. The lighting looks nice, the materials look nice, the model itself, all of these materials and the design looks pretty nice. And if I was a client, I would definitely think about buying this building based out of this render. So if you want to see how long this took to render, you can go to stamp. Then you can see that it took about 11 minutes, 45 seconds. So it was close to the time we set, which was around 10 minutes. Now you can go ahead and save this. So click on save, call it whatever you like, click on save. Now if you want to convert this to a night render, it's pretty simple. Go to source light mix. Let's save this light mix setting out because it's the day light mix setting. So I'm going to call this light mix dash day. And now I'm going to adjust this to make it a night render. So I'll switch off the sunlight. I'll reduce the values of the dome light. Alright, and I'll increase the values of the sphere lights. This looks nice, but for a night render, you need to have some street lights and some atmosphere. So that would make the night render pop even more. So we'll do that quickly in the next video. Before that, I'll save this out. Final render, night, partially. So next video, I'll show you how to add the street lights, the atmosphere and more to make your renders pop for the night render. Also, let's change the background of the dome light. So let's make it more darker. All right, this looks nice. We just need to add some street lights and we'll be ready with the scene. Let's save this out. Click on save and call this light mix night. Alright, so I'll see you guys next video. Cheers. Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, we're going to add a mood to our scene, especially for our night render. So you can see this was our night render, but it's not really a night render because you can see that it's sort of like an evening kind of a setting. So for the night render, we'll have to add a fog to create that entire sort of a mood in the render. And I'll show you how to create that using volumetric environment in V-Ray. Alright, to start off, what I'll do is add some street lights in our SketchUp model. So I'm going to go to my other SketchUp model, which I created before. I'm going to copy the street light. It's pretty useful. It's a nice street light that I can use. So Control C to copy and go to this SketchUp model. Control V to paste. You can't really do this in 3ds Max or other software. So that's something cool about SketchUp, where you can sort of copy paste between open SketchUp files. And I'll also move this. So let's go back to scene 1 and just move it inside the frame. So add one there and add one here as well. Sort of equal distance. And then I'll also add some 2 lights. So let's add a rectangular light. So click on rectangular light. And let's place the light in the ground first and then rotate it. So I placed it in the ground. I'm going to move it up by say 15 feet. 15 feet is a good height for streetlights. 15 feet, 20 feet. Yeah, 20 feet works well. And then let's rotate it by 180. I've locked. So I've rotated it by 180 as well. Let's move it in place. Let's see how this looks. Let's move it sort of down. So it's sitting below the street light. Right. So this is our street light here. By the way, if you're wondering how I got to the top view so fast, is because I've assigned certain shortcuts. So if you go to camera, standard views, I've assigned top to Alt T, assigned parallel projection to Alt W. So that makes me move to the plan view pretty fast as well. So I'm going to move this here, line this in the center. And I'll also move this here. So this is our rectangular light. Let's rename this. Let's go to lights. Rename this to street light. Open its settings. Make it invisible. So we make the source invisible. And let's change the directionality so there's more light falling on the ground. So you've added 2 lights. Let's assign this to our tags here. So let's go to default tray, show tray. Let's create a tag called street lights. And then select both of these. Use the tag tool, which is a new feature of SketchUp 2022, and then apply settings on, it's applied it on the wrong group. So I'll have to just undo that. Sort of zoom this way. Yeah, this is better. And now I can assign the lights. Yeah, so now if I switch this off, okay, if you're still not able to assign, the tag tool works. Sometimes it doesn't. So that's because this is like a bounding box. So you can't really select stuff properly. So just go to entity info and change the light here. So I've assigned it to street lights. Then it goes off because the tag was off. All right. So let's switch that on. And now we can start with our environmental fog or aerial perspective. All right. So to switch on environmental fog or to add fog in your scene, just go to asset editor, go to settings and switch on volumetric environment from your settings. There are various parameters here, which I will explain. So for the aerial perspective to work, you will need sunlight. Generally, most people use environmental fog over aerial perspective because there's more options in environmental fog. It works pretty much the same, but environmental fog can help you add dust particles in the air or give you more options compared to aerial perspective. Whereas aerial perspective is just to sort of add some fog in your render. So let's run an interactive render and then we'll see how these settings have an effect on the interactive render. So I'm going to switch off the street light for now. I'll switch it on later. I'll also switch on interactive, change this to NVIDIA AI and change the render output size so it's faster. And then I'll render with Vray Interactive. Alright, so we've added our environmental light. Now adding the environmental light made it sort of more brighter. It was actually darker before. It was like this before. The reason behind that is because of the volumetric environment, aerial perspective. So let's tweak the settings a bit. Let's also switch on the sunlight and see how that affects the scene. Okay, and let's move this to the left. And let's move SketchUp to the right. All right, great. Now I'll also switch off the default tray because I want to see the entire. All right, so the visibility range is how much distance the fog is from the camera. So it's in meters always in these settings. So you can see it's set at 6,000 meters. Now, the further you give your visibility, the less fog you will have in your scene. So for example, now it's at 6,000 meters. Let's say you set it at 1,000 meters from the camera. And now you can see that it instantly adds a fog. And atmosphere height is, of course, how much the height is of the fog from the ground. So now it's set at 6,000 meters, which goes all the way to the top. Let's try with 100 meters. You can also try with 3 meters, which is up to this level. So let's try with 3 meters. So you can see that it ends here. So from the ground, it is at about 3 meters. So in this case, you can see the background as well. So maybe you can set it up about 15 meters. So you can see some of the background. So don't go crazy with atmosphere height. If you want to like blend in your background with the fog, then you could set a lower value for artistic effect. Light multiplier basically controls the amount of sunlight scattered through the atmosphere. So if you sort of reduce this, you can see there's less sunlight getting scattered through the atmosphere. And if you sort of increase this, then there would be more sunlight being scattered to the atmosphere. So which means it gets more diffused. So let's keep it at the physically accurate value of 1. So we can just leave it at 1 there. Filter colors, of course, to change the color of the fog. So you can sort of make it more bluish if you like. For night renders, blue works well. And affect environment and background is to affect the environment light in your scene. So if I disable this, it's not going to affect the sky, but it would sort of affect the objects the camera rays are going to hit. But in most cases, you should just leave the affect environment on, and you should also leave the affect background on as well. So you can see that the fog doesn't affect the environment, background. So let's leave both of those on. And this is the volumetric environment. So you can further adjust this in the light mix. Now, for example, you can see there's some nice lighting coming from this side, which looks pretty cool. We can also switch on the street lights and see how much of an effect it has on the scene. So let's stop the interactive render. What I'll also do is I'll make one of the street lights unique. So let's show the default ray, show the street lights, and make this unique. So now we can control both these together individually. And let's run an interactive render. So you should see the light sort of bounce off from the car and from the roads and so on. So you can see a lot of highlights here on the car and on the road as well. Now the sunlight is affecting this entire scene here. So the sun is falling this way. And you can see it creates a nice sort of effect on the scene where the light is falling into the scene. You can also make it sort of darker for more of a night effect. And we can make the street light, of course, orangish in color. And we can make these more bluish, the background, and more bluish. That looks good. The fog actually affects the horizon, so you can see some amount of light at the background. You can leave that as is. And what you can also do is switch on the lens effect to see the lights from our street lamps here. So let's enable bloom glare from the lens effect, so you can see more pronounced effects here. And we can sort of increase the size and intensity. And this looks pretty decent. And we can also play around with the street lights, so make it 10. You can see there's more light here. It's sort of hitting that person's back, and that's reflecting as well. You can see here as well. So that's pretty cool. Looks nice. Looks a little too lit, so maybe you can switch off the sunlight. So now the light is just falling on the street light there. That looks pretty cool. Or you can sort of reduce the sunlight as well. You can reduce the street light as well. Maybe 10 is too much. And this looks cool. We have some nice light bounce here. Maybe the lens effect was a little too much, so we can reduce the intensity. And we have a cool looking render. We can of course change the color of the light mix if you like. We can make it more warm as well. But it's a good idea to have a mix between blue and orange in your render. That will make the render look nice as well. Let's maybe increase the sphere light. And that should suffice. So we have our first render with the basic settings, with the default settings that is. We did play around with the visibility range, but generally the visibility range should work for elevation renders like these, where you can just set it at 1000 and set the height at around 15 meters or even lower or even higher sometimes, depending on your artistic taste. So now we'll go ahead and render this out and add it to the History VFP. So stop the render, go to settings, switch off interactive. Let's set this at 10 minutes and let's set this at V-Ray. Let's set the height 1200 by 1500. And now we'll render with V-Ray. Alright guys, so our render is done. Let's add this to the History VFP. And this took about 11 minutes and 17 seconds based on the final render settings. So it's pretty decent and I like the render as well. So that's why I sort of went ahead and rendered this. You can sort of play around with these settings. Now the fog color is coming from this here. So you can see it's still kind of still bright. So that's why the color there was bright as well. So if you make it darker, then this part of the render would be darker as well. So that's a quick tip. And yeah, so this video is kind of long, so I'm going to talk about environmental fog in the next video. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Cheers. Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, we're going to experiment with environmental fog and create an awesome fog render in our scene. Okay, to start off, I'm going to switch off the street lights. Let's see if our trees are on. Yeah, trees are all there. Scene 1, switch off street lights again. So each time you click on scene 1, the tag gets back on. So let's switch it off. Do not update it because we need the street lights back at a later stage. Alright, to switch on environmental fog, just go to Asset Editor and switch on volumetric environment and change the aerial perspective to environmental fog. By the way, the aerial perspective render look like this. It's good, but aerial perspective is limited to a certain extent. It only adds sort of fog in your scene, doesn't add particles or dust or stuff like that, which you can do with environmental fog. So I'll switch to environmental fog and let's use the default settings without changing any of it and run an interactive render. So I'm going to run an interactive render. By the way, let's just change the interactive render settings because it's reading from the Vray denoiser. That's not what I need. Let's change this to NVIDIA AI, change the size as well, make it sort of faster, and then run an interactive render. Alright, great. So it's added a fog to the entire scene. Now, again, the units are in meters and it's automatically changed if you're using inches or any other units in SketchUp. So in this case, you can see that the distance set at 1000 meters from the camera. The larger you give the distance, the lesser fog you have in your scene. And the closer you give the distance, the more fog you have. So let's say, for example, you set this at 100. So you can see that's completely foggy and there's like hardly any light. It makes it darker as well. And the height from a certain Z level. So I'm going to assume it's from the horizon line in SketchUp. Vray hasn't really clarified this, but we can assume it from the ground. So let's say, for example, if we make this 300. So that will make it completely dark. You can see that goes up all the way here. So let's set the height at around 50 meters. So you can see it just goes up till here. 75 goes up to here. So the height should be set at around 100 meters as well. So it's a trial and error when you use environmental fog to figure out which is the right distance and height. So let's set the height at around 100 meters. We'll change this later. Once we switch on the lights, it's going to show up like really cool. And the distance I'm going to set at around 200 meters. Yeah, that looks decent. And the color is the color of the fog. So if you make it, either make it bluish or you can make it sort of warmish as well. Let's make it sort of bluish. And then use the color to eliminate this fog. Emission is to eliminate or emit light within the fog. So if you drag this, you can see that the fog becomes more brighter. Changes color and becomes less sort of darker. So if you want more emission in your scene, then you can sort of increase the emission and you can also increase the emission multiplier. So if I make this 10, you can see that becomes darker, brighter that is. So it completely becomes bright. Let's leave it at 1 and let's not use emission. I think the fog should work well. Maybe some amount of white light might help because it's a little too dark. And Skatter GI is a pretty cool tool where it'll scatter the global illumination within the fog, sort of create volumetric shadows and stuff like that. It is more CPU intensive. So what it does is you have even scatter bounce, which is set at 4. So basically when the sunlight hits, so it'll be 1, it hits the object, then it bounces off from the object. Since this is set at 4, so it'll go 1, 2, 3, 4. So 4 bounces from each of these objects. And that is global illumination. I explained it very shortly, but I hope you get the idea where the light bounces off an object and then goes to another object and bounces off from that object as well. And this is how primarily Vray works. So let's switch on Skatter GI and see how much of an effect it has in the scene. So you can see that you get more realistic environment in your scene. And what I'll also do is, if you go to affected by, you can see that's affected by all the lights. So maybe I don't want the interior lights to get affected by the fog. So I can sort of use only selected lights. And let's just select the dome lights, the street lights, both the street lights and the sunlight as well. All right. And effect is like if you want the fog to affect camera rays, if you want it to affect the background or not. Usually I just leave all 3 on because I want the fog to sort of create that mood in the scene. And this is our fog. I know it looks like crap, but once you add the lights, it's going to look lit. So let's stop the interactive render. You can add this to the H2UFP, just do a before and after. And let's switch on the street lights. And now let's run interactive render. So let's make sure you click on scene 1, run interactive render. Alright, so the light has affected the fog, but not as much. So let's change the color of the street light first. Make it more warm. And let's increase the intensities. So now you can see the fog affecting the render. Let's change the atmosphere height. Let's change the distance as well. Let's set it at 500. And let's change the height to say 300. And now you get that cool sort of artistic effect in your render. You can further change the distance. So maybe set it at 1000. Usually the default settings work well for an elevation render. Now what I'll also do is increase the dome light because I want more light entering the scene. And I'll increase the sphere light as well. Let's keep the default color. So let's keep it as white. Keep the emission to 0. And we have a scattered light effect or the fog. Further increase it, keep it at 500. I think the default settings worked well for this render. Now since it's an interactive render, you won't see the details, but once I do the final render, it would look really nice. You can also switch out this GI just to see how much of an effect it has on the scene. It's a very artistic kind of a render, but it also brings in that mood in your scene. Just play around with the light mix settings here. This is a very CPU intensive sort of a render. So only if you're feeling a little too artistic, then you can go ahead and play around with environmental fog. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and run the final render for this render and see how it looks. So let's stop the interactive render. The height seemed right at 500, so I'll leave it at 500 and I'll set it up for the final render. So switch off interactive, set the render to 15 minutes this time because the longer you leave the render, the better it is. Let's set it at 1200 and let's set the denoiser at Vray. Save this file out and then click on that render button. So I'll see you guys once the render is done. Alright guys, so the render is done, but it's pretty hazy. Let's try changing the streetlight settings. So let's set this at 3. And let's set this at 3 as well. That looks much better, but it's still kind of too hazy and there's a lot of noise in the scene. That's because we set a final render, progressive render to about 15 minutes. So it's better to use the bucket render mode for our environmental fog render because it would render these particles better and it would make the scene look better as well and not too noisy. So I'm going to add this to the history VFP and save this as a progress as well. And in the next video, we'll play around with the render elements and do a final render, and then we'll do some post-production in the Vray frame buffer. So you'll learn some cool new techniques to sort of change colors of certain materials, switch off the atmosphere in composite, boost the image a bit more, add some LUT files, and so on. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Cheers. Hey guys, welcome to the final video of the course. I'm super proud that you guys made it this far and super glad as well. I hope you learned a ton so far. And this is going to be the icing on the cake because we're going to learn some cool new techniques and features in Vray to finish your composition directly in Vray. So you can do the post-production directly within Vray. How cool is that? If you notice the previous video, the render didn't come out as is expected, and that is because of certain settings. So we'll fix that quickly in this video. So let's go to our Vray frame buffer. And this was the render from the previous video. You can see there's a lot of haze. It's sort of noisy as well. So to fix this, it's because there's too much of noise in the scene. So if I go to source light mix and sort of make all of these normal, you can see that there's a lot of fog in the scene. And that's the reason why the render came out too noisy. So we'll have to increase the distance of the fog or environmental fog from the camera. So let's do that. Let's go to our settings here. If I switch on the sun as well, because these lights are affected by the environmental fog. So if we go to the environmental fog settings here, you can see that all these lights are affected by the environmental fog. So you need to adjust them accordingly. And the best way is by increasing the distance. So let's set this at 1500 mm, that's 1500 meters from the camera, and this should sort of reduce the fog in the scene. So let's run an interactive render. Make sure you're using interactive NVIDIA AI and the output is set at around 600. Alright, you can see that there's less fog now in the render, and if we load the previous light mix settings, which is the night light mix setting, click on load, find it in the exercise files from the final touch render setting and click on load. You can see that we have a better sort of a render here, and there's not too much noise as well, and you can still see the haze in the render. So this looks pretty cool, and I'm happy with this result. So I can also switch on the sunlight, but you see that the sunlight affects the entire scene. You could probably reduce the sunlight setting and make it slightly darker, and that would sort of fix that as well. So if you want more haze on top, then you can switch on the sunlight and play around with these settings. Right, so I'm happy with this. I'm going to add this to the H3 VFB, and now I can set this up for our final render. So stop the render, and let's add some render elements. So the render elements allows you to add more reflections, refractions, change the color of your render, change the color of certain materials, certain objects, and more. So let's click on render element, right click, and let's start by adding a crypto matte, which automatically assigns different colors to various materials in your scene. Now let's say, for example, you want all the iron materials to have a certain material or a certain color. Then you can select this material, and then you can click on the plus button here and add a material ID. So this material ID color will be assigned to all the iron materials, and it'll be easy to select that material as well. Let's just give an ID number of 1 for this material. And now we should go back to render elements and add a material ID number. So since we assigned the number 1 to this material, all these materials will have the same color in the final render. Let's do the same for the glass materials as well, in case you want to boost the glass or so on. So you can click on the plus button, add a material ID, and add a ID number of 2. You can either add a ID number or a color, but make sure you add the right render element. You don't need to add both material ID color and ID number. ID number should suffice as well. And let's see which other materials we can add ID colors to, or ID numbers. So ID number 3, then this wall here. So I'll quickly go ahead and add various numbers. All right. And we can also assign material IDs to an entire object. So if I go back to scene 1, I can select this car object, right click, go to Vray object ID, selection, and click on set, and give an object ID of 1. So now since I've assigned object ID, you need to add the object ID render element, and that would make a certain color for the entire car. Alright, these are the material render elements that you need to change colors of certain materials in your scene. Let's do the same for this object here as well, because it doesn't have a material ID. So let's give maybe 4 here. Cool. And now you can add something more in your render elements. For example, you can add a Z depth to add more fog. Generally, we use a Z depth in Photoshop, so it's a good idea to add the Z depth as well. And you can use this as an alternative to adding environmental fog in Vray in case you want to add the fog in Photoshop. So what the Z depth does is that it creates a gray composite image of your render, where the objects closest to the camera are more white, and the objects which are further away from the camera are more black or gray scale. So you can see the background is completely black, then the furthest away object is sort of grayish. This gets less grayish and more whitish, and then finally have a nice white object which is right in front of the camera. So what this helps is that we can create a simple depth of field shot using the Z depth in Photoshop. So we're going to try using this in Vray if we can, but in most scenarios they use it in Photoshop. So you can add a Z depth, and then we can add the basic stuff, which is reflection, refraction. You can try adding specular as well, and we can also add atmosphere in case you want to add more atmospheric effects in your render. And we can also add self-illumination. Self-illumination is a great way to change the background color in Photoshop or even in Vray frame buffer. Add other render elements as well, but these render elements should suffice. We can also add the lighting render elements. So we can add the lighting, and we can add the global illumination. So what these do is they store the information of the direct light, and the global illumination stores information of the indirect light, GI, in your scene. So you can further take this in Photoshop, or also try the Vray VFB composite and create some cool effects. Alright, so this is good to go. And finally, we're going to use the bucket render mode this time. It's going to take ages to render. So we'll just come back in an hour or so, depending on your system speed. So let's switch off progressive. Let's use Vray. If you're short on time, I would suggest that you use progressive and just set a time limit. But if you want like a really crystal clear render, then you need to switch this off. Go to render output, change the size to say 1200. Save the file, and then smash that render button. So I'll see you guys in a bit once the render is done. Right guys, the render is done. Also, by the way, the bucket render took a little too long to render, so I switched it off and then rendered it progressive. You guys can do the same as well. Just stick to progressive and set it about 15 minutes. Of course, the longer you leave the render, the better resolution you get. Alright, so now we can fix this render or this haze here by adjusting the light mix settings. So let's switch on the sunlight so you can see that it adds a haze throughout the scene. And let's make it dark maybe. Not too dark, just a little. Let's increase the self-illumination. Let's maybe keep it at 10. Change the color as well. And let's switch on the lens effects. So let's go to lens effects, switch that on and click on the eye tool. So now you can see that it sort of pops. Let's go back to source light mix. Let's set the street light to 1 and 1. Now if you set it to 3 and 3, it sort of increases the light here, but you can see a lot of noise there. So let's keep it to 1 and 1. Let's also change this, make it slightly more brighter. And then of course, once you've added all of those, you can reduce the values. Or you can also switch off some of them and just use a single HDRI as well. It's a good idea to mix HDRIs. I like doing that. Let's keep the sun settings as 1. And this looks pretty decent. So you have a nice night render. You can maybe increase the lighting inside the scene. So maybe like set the Omni light at 20 and the sphere light at 20 as well. So you can see that the interiors lit up a bit more. You won't see the reflections as much because the interiors are more lit. You can maybe reduce it, let's say 15. Let's not make it too warm, tad bit warm. That should suffice, and maybe increase the street light a bit more just to see that haze there. And maybe just increase the sunlight a bit more. Alright, this looks good. And now what I'll do is set it up and change the colors and so on since we've rendered our render elements. So if we go to Crypto Matte, you can see that assigned different colors, material ID number, self-illumination. So self-illumination helps you change the background. So you can select all the black, then change it. Then we have object ID as well, which is the car. Z-depth is not rendered, so we can leave it as is. We may have not set the right distance of Z-depth, so we can leave Z-depth as is. We have refraction. We have specular. We also have reflection. So let's try to use all these render elements in the composite. So all you need to do is click on to composite, make sure light gen tone 1 is also selected and reduce the amount. Alright, this looks fine. You can see some fog kind of an effect in the environment. Definitely looks like a night render. So let's click on to composite and now we can start the Vray post-production process. So let's add a render element to the glass material, or just add the render element and then apply it to the render here. So to add that, just click on the plus button here, click on render element. So now you can see it's RGB color. Let's change this to reflection. And you can change the overlay. So you can change the overlay to screen. That would make the reflections more reflective. You can also apply it just to the glass. To do that, select the material. So click here and click on Crypto Matte Mask and pick a material, and let's select the glass material. So now if I show the preview, you can see all of the glass material selected. Let's select this glass material as well. And this glass material as well. You can see all the glass material selected. And now if I do a before and after, you can see that the reflection increases on the glass. Similarly, you can add some refraction as well. So let's go to the plus button here, click on render element, change this to refraction, change it to screen. And then of course you need to add the mask only for the glass. You can see that really pops that glass material, that refraction. So just add it to the glass here. So all you need to do is click on this button, click on the Crypto Matte Mask and pick the glass materials. And now if you show, see that the glass material is added, and we added some cool refraction as well on the glass material. Alright, now let's add more stuff. So let's go to render elements. Let's add maybe the global illumination, and you can change this to screen as well. So this would make it sort of more brighter. You can see that makes it brighter. And you can also reduce the amount. It's a little too much. Just to make it slightly brighter, all these walls here, make it brighter. Let's add more render elements. Maybe specular this time. So you can see it lights up the trees, the car, and so on, in the poles here. Now, if you like this effect, you can go ahead, add it without a mask. But it's a good idea to always add some masks. So let's select the car, the glass maybe, and definitely this pole here because that sort of started shining. So that's cool. Maybe these steel bars here as well. So now you can see it applies all over there. Select all of these. All right. Let's reduce specular, not too much, just a bit. That looks cool as well. You can of course play around with the light settings here as well. If you don't want to show a particular light, you can do that. But let's leave it as is. Maybe just reduce the intensity. Right, cool. And in case you want to change the color of a certain element, let's say this wall, then what you need to do is you need to create a new folder. So right click on new layer and click on folder. You can rename this. Or you can rename it here, call this wall color. And then you can click here, click on crypto matte mask and pick the wall material. And then you can right click, go to new layer and click on color balance. And you can sort of change the color. So you can make it more red maybe. You can also add a curve, for example, new layer curve. And then you can sort of boost the reds a bit more. So you have a nice red material. How cool is that? And then you can of course change the color again. And some greens maybe. Green looks nice as well. Maybe not too dark. So let's go to effect here. Sort of reduce the effect. And then of course you can also change the opacity. So it's not too green, just pastel green. Looks nice as well. You can do the same for these rods here. So let's right click, go to new layer, on folder. Rename this, call these beams, changing the color of the beams. And then again, right click. And then you can click here, click on crypto matte mask. And then select these objects. Let's show them. So all of these are selected. These here as well. Right, that's cool. Then of course you need to right click, go to new layer. This time let's use, for example, hue saturation. So you can increase the saturation of that or reduce the saturation. Increase the lightness or make it more darker as well. But let's keep it at 0. And you can change the color this way as well. Boost the blacks. So right click, go to new layer, click on curves, and then sort of boost it this way. You can of course go back to beams, go to crypto matte and add additional stuff. For example, this here. And these elements, all of these. That looks nicer as well. You can go back to wall color. I don't like this color. So let's keep it like that. Maybe make it blue. Orange looks nice. That looks nice. Right, so this is our final render. And then let's maybe add more fog. You can do that as well. So maybe right click, go to new layer, click on render element and change the render element to atmosphere and change the blending mode to lighten or multiply. So you can see that boosts the fog in the scene. Makes it more prevalent on the top. That looks cool as well. And you can sort of reduce the amount of the atmosphere. Alright, so we created a nice looking night render. And finally, if you want to get rid of this noise, then of course you'll have to reduce the street light values. But overall, I think we did a good job. So let's add this to the HDVFB and then save it out as well. Also guys, I played around with the settings a bit more. It was a little too bright. So what I did was I added some additional exposure, filmic tone map, sort of reduced opacity. I played around with the exposure and the contrast. Added some white balance. So to make it more, cool, or make it more warm. It's a little too warm, so sort of made it more cool. And I also reduced the opacity of all of these. For example, the specular, the wall color, the beams. So it's not too contrasty and sits well in the scene. And then of course you can reduce the atmosphere as well. I can switch it off. And then I also adjusted some of these. Finally, you can also save this preset out. So you can click on save and save it out as a layer 3 preset. And you can load it in if you are doing a larger resolution render. Then of course, don't forget to save these. And you can also click and hold and save all the channels in case you want to do some further post-production in Photoshop. Alright guys, so this is the final render that I was able to achieve, and I sort of tweaked certain settings as well. If you go to the VD Asset Editor, you can see that I changed from bucket to progressive because bucket was taking forever. But I did set the time limit to 90 minutes. And you can also see that I changed the distance of the environment fog to 1500 and the height to 1000 so that there was fog throughout the scene. And I also made some changes to the light mix. For example, I switched off all the dome lights because I wanted a more darker scene. And I also reduced the sunlight and made it more darker. So you have this nice cool effect that we get. Also, I increased the street light to 1. So you can see these effects here. The light sort of scattering through the fog definitely creates a sense of mood in this render. And finally, I also saved this 3 presets. So you click on save and save it out. So I've saved out a dark preset, and I've also saved out a light preset. So if you click on load and click on. Alright, so I hope you guys found this course useful. Please do leave a review and also stay tuned for more awesome content coming your way in the future. I'll see you guys in the next course and videos. Cheers.